Hey everybody! So today we are going to talk about home construction and the techniques used in the US and other countries and what might be better with other techniques opposed to the way the US does it. So let's get right into it. We're Douglas and Esperanza, and we decided to leave our lives in the US and move to magical Loreto, Mexico, where we built our boutique resort Pufferfishvillas from the ground up and work running it and saving to expand in the future. Please come with us to follow our journey and live before you die. Most places in the world have natural disasters, whether that be fires, earthquakes, hurricanes, or tornadoes, or other natural disasters, and they are a very regular event all around the world. So when people build houses in these areas that have natural disasters, it would make sense that they build their houses to be able to withstand the natural disasters that regularly affect the area. So today we're going to talk about specifically fire, but we're going to talk about some of the other natural disasters too, and how Mexican construction, at least Mexican construction here in Loreto, but also in most of Mexico, is much more resilient to all of the natural disasters than the type of construction we use in the US. In the US, the overwhelming majority of homes are built with what they call stick-built construction method, using dimensional lumber to frame up a exoskeleton of the house, which is a structure that holds up everything else in the house and creates the shell for the house. This is because of many reasons. One, the plentiful availability of wood in the US, especially many years ago when these construction standards kind of came into being popular, and just the cost because of the availability of the wood and all that, and the familiarity of construction people knowing how to build these type of structures. But the US is kind of an outlier. Most of the rest of the world does not use stick-built construction for their homes. I believe US, Canada, some of Australia and New Zealand use stick-built construction. It may be used in a few other places around the world, and of course you're going to see it sporadically all over the place. But the majority of the people in the world build their houses out of either stone or concrete. Now, building with stone is probably the oldest method there is for homes. There are structures that are thousands and thousands of years old built out of stones. The pyramids are built out of stones. Lots of other things that are built out of stones thousands and thousands of years ago are still standing today in relatively good shape. Contrast that to a 200-year-old house or a 300-year-old house that hasn't had any maintenance in 200 years, and there won't even be a house there anymore in the US, a stick-built house. Now, stones are very difficult because they have to be cut and fitted into a structure. So those aren't really used too much in modern construction. They are used sometimes with a large mortar in between. That type of construction is not as durable as just a stone-built home because the mortar is a weak point and you have to have a lot of mortar because normally they don't cut and fit the stones. So then you have a lot of mortar and the mortar is a weak point. Those homes do last a long time, but not as long as just a stone-built home. So for modern day, around most of the world, most construction is cement or CMU, concrete block, or cinder block as it's well known. And that is the primary construction method in Mexico, and that's what all of our buildings are built out of. So let's go into our villa and we can take a look and see how these things are built and why they are so much better for fire, earthquake, and hurricanes and tornadoes. So before we go inside, let's talk about the outside of the structures. So these structures are a concrete shell. There's a concrete slab, concrete walls, and a concrete roof. Solid concrete roof. Now, there is some wood on the outside, and that, of course, could burn in a fire. But other than this wood, which is just decorative, does not penetrate the building and would not let fire get into the building. It's just built on the outside. In normal Mexican construction, there is no other combustible materials on the outside of the house. Yeah, you have windows which are not combustible. They're aluminum frame windows down here. That's pretty much all they do in Mexican style homes. We have a wood door, but most Mexican homes don't use a wood door. They're going to use a metal door because that's the most common thing. Now, some upper end homes do use a wood door, and that would be one area where fire could penetrate from the inside to the outside of the house. Now, could the window break and fire get inside the house? Of course, but most of the time when houses burn down, it's because embers and sparks land on the house. They start burning the outside combustible materials on the house, and then that fire works its way inside. Here, if that happened, it would just burn off this patio cover, which is a couple $1,000s to replace, and fire would not be able to make it into the house, most likely. So now let's take a look at the inside of the house. Now, the floor is built out of concrete. Almost all floors in Mexico are tiled, so of course nothing is flammable there. The walls in the inside are concrete. They put a brown coat, which is a stucco coat of concrete on that, and then here we have a coat of plaster on top of that. The plaster is probably about 1/8 of an inch thick, and it's just to smooth out the concrete coat on the inside. A lot of Mexican homes won't have that plaster, they just have the concrete on the inside. But there is no like furring out and drywall and all that in here. There's nothing to be damaged. It's just concrete with a thin coat of plaster on it. And most Mexico homes aren't gonna have that thin coat of plaster. They're just gonna have a concrete wall on the inside that's painted or not painted. So now we'll talk about the ceiling. The ceiling is built out of concrete. The top of the roof is 5 inches thick of solid concrete. The bottom is made of a waffle construction with foam blocks coated with a layer of stucco, which is concrete, and then a thin layer of plaster. So the roof is not combustible from the inside or the outside. There is nothing that can burn on this roof. As I said before, the windows are aluminum frame windows, glass windows in most Mexican houses. Wood frame windows are very expensive. You don't find them very often. As I said, we have an expensive wood door on the outside. That is unusual. A normal Mexican house is going to have a metal door normally. So continuing to look around here about what could be combustible and what could burn in a fire, we have to look at the cabinets. We have wood cabinets in this villa. This is very unusual for Mexican construction also. Normally, in traditional Mexican construction, the cabinets are all built out of concrete, and usually they're open shelf cabinetry built out of concrete. So there's nothing combustible in the kitchen as far as the cabinetry. Bathrooms, the same thing. So here in a bathroom, this is a typical Mexican bathroom, what you're gonna find, and you're gonna see this, a built-in place concrete vanity with open shelving. Now, I don't particularly like this style because I think it's really messy with the open shelving. You can put doors on it. Sometimes people will put a curtain on the front of that to cover up the stuff, but I prefer the cabinets. But you know what? For fire resistance and for your house not burning down, this is definitely the way to go. Looking in the bedroom here, we can see that we did what is very common in Mexico, a concrete nightstand. We have a concrete bed frame, and that is also very common Mexican construction. In fact, in a lot of Mexican construction, they'll actually do the living room furniture as concrete also, and then put cushions on it. So we do have wood cabinets in our villa for our closets, and this is unusual again for Mexico. You would normally see all of this built out of concrete. Your closet would normally be built out of concrete and just have a curtain on it. Sometimes they'll put a wood door on them, but that's more upper end construction in Mexico. So as you can see, because of the construction methods they use, the only thing there really is to burn inside a traditional Mexican home is the contents. This is the main reason that you don't see homeowners insurance in Mexico. Homeowners insurance in Mexico is very rare, generally only used by expats because they don't feel comfortable owning a home that is not insured. And if you did have a fire on the inside of your home in Mexico, generally the damage would be very contained to a small area. So let's say you had a fire start. Let's say it started in the couch, and it's going to burn the couch, burn up the curtains. Now in a stick-built house like in the US, where everything inside the house is combustible and flammable, those curtains are going to burn up, start the ceiling on fire, everything starts burning, that fire quickly moves through the house, and the house ends up having a major fire, could destroy the whole house. Here, if the couch caught on fire and then burned the curtains, the ceiling is concrete, the walls are concrete. So the likelihood is that a fire that started here, even if nobody did anything to it, would most likely end up just burning itself out because there is no fuel left for it to burn. It's going to burn in this corner of the room, burn out, and that's it. And we do have fire extinguishers in both villas. So if a guest was here and a fire started, they could easily put it out quickly. If for some reason, somehow this fire jumped from this curtain to this curtain to this curtain and burned all this up, what would we lose? Well, let's think of the traditional way where we have concrete cabinets. If you had a fire like that here, you're going to lose a couple sets of cushions, maybe a chair or two, and a couch. That's probably going to be your total loss for this fire. And so that's why you don't see Mexicans buying homeowners insurance, because it wouldn't make sense to pay hundreds of dollars a month or $50 a month for the thing that once in your lifetime you might have a fire. And when you do have that fire, your total cost to replace everything that you burned up in the fire might only be $1,000. And maybe you've paid $20,000 in premiums into that fire policy. So it really doesn't make sense. If you had the possibility of your entire home being destroyed, where you would have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of replacement costs, then it makes sense to have a policy. And here, even if it was a fire outside and it burned off this whole patio cover, that's still, I can rebuild that for about $3,000. The whole thing, even with the posts and everything. So it does not pencil out to do homeowners insurance in Mexico. The cost of doing replacement and fixing things is very low, and that would be the least expensive way to do it instead of paying for a policy your whole life. I brought you out here because I'm going to talk a little bit about other types of disasters. And we're going to talk about tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes. So when I came down here, I had always heard that masonry is really bad in earthquakes, and that you don't want a masonry house in an earthquake. For the types of homes they build in the US, that is true. That is because masonry homes in the US are almost never built completely out of masonry with the construction techniques they use here. They're generally a stick-built wood house that just has a masonry veneer on it. That veneer is just held on by little tiny clips, and it is not strong at all. It's just basically a facing to protect the outside of the house. Here in Mexico, the buildings are built with a post and beam reinforced concrete construction. And this is the most resistant construction method for earthquakes, especially in 1 or 2-story buildings. Now, what this method entails, and I can kind of show you here, is you have columns, which you can see the column running up there. You can see there's a column running up here. And then beams. And you can see the beam running around here. There also is a beam at the very top. So what this does for the floor and the walls is that the entire thing is tied together with a metal exoskeleton. So there is a total metal mesh and reinforced rebar in the foundation. There are rebar beams built along the perimeter of the foundation and the floor. Those rebar beams tie into the columns, which tie into the beams that go across every 8 feet, and those tie into the beams that go encircle the entire top perimeter of the building. And then with a concrete roof, which we don't have a concrete roof in here, but we do have a concrete roof in our villas, the entire roof is a grid called waffle construction, a grid of rebar beams put together. All of that rebar is all tied together, so there is a rebar exoskeleton of columns and beams and a rebar mesh basically on the roof that covers the entire house. Then all of those rebar columns and beams get encased in concrete like this and like this. And you can see this is like 10-inch thick beam. It's like a 10-inch thick by 6-inch thick the other way. And so what this gives you is a very, very strong post and beam metal reinforced structure, and the filler material is the concrete block. Now, the concrete block on its own, if you just built a wall out of this concrete block with no other reinforcement, I could just push it over. I could push this whole thing over with my hand if it was just built like that. But when the concrete blocks are encased in a frame of steel reinforced concrete, and the blocks are put in first, and then the concrete is poured around, so the concrete actually is into the ends of the block, into the top of the block, and so it's held very, very tightly. And studies show that this construction method is the strongest construction method for earthquakes. But you might say, hold on, that roof above you is a metal roof. That is true. Metal roofs are very common in Mexico also, because they are inexpensive, but they are built to a much higher type of construction that I've ever seen in the US. And I believe, in my opinion, that this metal roof is very strong. Now, in a hurricane or a tornado, could the metal roofing get ripped off? Very possibly. That's the one risk you have with a metal roof. It is not going to hold up as well to a hurricane or a tornado as a concrete roof, because of course nothing can hurt a concrete roof. These beams are all heavy steel beams. This is a 4-inch steel beam. These are 2x4 steel beams, 2 of them welded together for strength. All of the joints are welded on these beams. So they are also welded into plates that were installed in the concrete and connected to the rebar mesh frame. So they are connected to that exoskeleton of rebar It's welded together. All the joints are welded, and this roof frame is not going anywhere. Now, could you rip the paneling off of it? Possibly. I think that the roofing panels are much better secured than they would be to a wood substrate, because if you're putting little screws into a wood substrate, it's a lot easier to pull that out with a wind than to pull them out of, 1/8 inch thick steel, which is what they're screwed into here, because they're screwed into these beams. So my opinion is that this is much more durable against a hurricane or tornado than being a metal roof on a wood substrate, but it still could possibly be damaged in a hurricane. I wanted to show you up here in my shop, I have massive, massive beams. These are double 10-inch by 4-inch beams, 2 of them weld together. So it's making a 10-inch by 8-inch beam. And the crossbars are 2 by 4 beams. They are all welded together. They are welded to plates installed in the concrete beam and hooked to the rebar, all on the top. And trust me, you could park a semi-truck on top of this roof if the decking was strong enough. And there is nothing, no hurricane on the planet is going to rip at least the metal structure off this roof. And I doubt that it could even rip the roofing off of it, because the roofing is all put into these 2 by 4 crossbars, which are a thick steel C-beam. So very, very strong, solid construction techniques. So wrapping up with hurricanes and tornadoes. We don't get tornadoes here, we get hurricanes. Normally they're not super strong, but a super strong hurricane could happen. What would happen if a big hurricane hit? The places where I would worry about that is, of course, the windows, because you would worry about flying debris coming through the window and then breaking the window, and then water is going to get inside the building. Now, is a building going to be damaged by a hurricane? Absolutely not. This is concrete. This roof is a total of 15 inches thick of concrete. There's no way that a hurricane is going to do anything to the actual building, but it could break a window and then get water inside the building. In like an apocalyptic scenario, could some kind of storm surge come up from the ocean and make it in here? I think it's probably zero chance of that. But even if that did happen, let's look at what would happen. If water got in here, into the villa, we've got a concrete floor with tile on it. And then we have concrete walls with a thin coat of plaster. Now, of course, if there was a hurricane, your contents could get damaged and have to be replaced. But if we were facing a very major hurricane, we would probably take some steps to try to move stuff up and get everything so it's the least likely, get it away from the windows so that it would be the least likely that things would get damaged. We might even get some type of covers for the windows. You could put plywood over the windows. They make storm shutters, all types of things. So there's things we could do to make the house more durable to hurricanes. If we ever do have a major hurricane that's going to hit, I would probably get plywood and put it over the windows, and the chances of anything happening are almost zero. But let's say the worst case happened. Water came up here, filled up 3 or 4 feet, like has happened in different natural disasters and hurricanes around the world. What is going to happen? Now here, we would probably have more damage than most people because we have wood cabinets. Those would probably get damaged and have to be replaced. And I would probably replace them with concrete, because then you wouldn't have to worry about it. But if you had concrete cabinets, which is typical in Mexico construction, you aren't going to have any damage there. The walls. In a stick-built house, if you get water up the walls, Now that water penetrates, gets inside the walls, and you've got a lot of work to cut out all the drywall, dry it all out and replace it. Here with concrete walls, with a little tiny bit of plaster, I don't even think you'd have to replaster. You probably would just let it dry out. It would dry out in a couple days and you would repaint. And that would be the extent of your repairs. So in a major hurricane apocalyptic scenario, if you took care of the furniture, even if a window broke, the whole thing filled up with water, everything else, your damages again are going to be the cost to repair a broken window, the cost to clean up all the mud and stuff, which I would do myself, it would be free, and the cost to repaint the bottom edge of your walls where the water came in. So again, homeowners insurance doesn't really make a lot of sense because the likelihood of that's going to happen is very low. It might only be a once in your lifetime likelihood. And so if you pay a lifetime of homeowners premiums, it's going to be magnitudes more than the cost of replacing a window and some paint and cleaning up for a couple days. So, and even if we had to replace all our cabinets and replace them with new cabinets, it still is going to be nowhere near what we would pay for homeowners insurance for a lifetime on this house. So, you know, that's why we don't have homeowners insurance to cover the buildings in Mexico, and that's why virtually no Mexicans have it, because they build their houses to be more durable, more resistant to natural disasters, so that they have minimal damages when there is a natural disaster. So now the big question, why doesn't the U.S. build homes that are resistant to the natural disasters in the areas where the homes are built? Now I know they are starting to do some of this in Florida. I think this is being forced by the insurance companies, where they are starting to go to concrete block construction like they use in Mexico. They're starting to go to that in Florida because it is proven to be so much better for hurricanes. So in my opinion, reinforced concrete and concrete block construction is the premier best building method for resistance to all types of natural disasters. So in closing, I'm hoping and praying that, you know, the people in Los Angeles, when they rebuild their homes, will try to think about fire resistance on the outside of their home and try to build homes that are going to be more resistant to this in the future, because these types of fires have happened many times in the past. They're probably going to happen many times in the future, and there could be a lot less destruction if homes were rebuilt to standards that made them basically fireproof, like homes all around the rest of the world are. All right, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this kind of strange video for my channel, but I thought it was a good time to do it. Hit the like button if you liked the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and never forget to live before you die.